The first truly dangerous man I ever dated never raised his voice at me. He brought me flowers. He remembered my favorite drink, my mother's favorite flower, the book I said I kept meaning to reread, and the exact day of a work presentation I mentioned once in passing. He texted good morning without fail. He opened doors. He used words like intentional, consistent, emotionally available. If you had asked me after our second date whether he seemed safe, I would have said yes. If you had asked my therapist, she probably would have smiled and told me this was exactly the kind of man I was supposed to be giving a chance. And if you had asked my body, it would have told you the truth before I had language for it. My body wanted out. I just didn't know yet that wanting to leave was enough. The night it finally clicked, I was standing outside my best friend's apartment in the cold with my heels in one hand and my phone in the other, trying to decide whether I had just escaped a bad date or ruined a perfectly good one because I was still emotionally broken. That's the kind of confusion men like Ethan rely on. Not your fear. Your self-doubt. Not your certainty. Your willingness to explain away your own discomfort until it looks irrational even to you. I hit Tessa's buzzer with shaking fingers and watched my reflection in the black glass of the front door. My lipstick was mostly gone. My hair looked fine. My face looked calm enough that if anyone had passed me on the sidewalk, they would have thought I was waiting for an Uber, not trying to figure out why my whole body felt like it had been sprinting. The door buzzed. I went inside. Tessa opened her apartment before I even knocked. One look at me and her expression changed. What happened? The question should have been easy to answer. I had just left his apartment 10 minutes earlier. I should have had a neat sequence. He said this, then I said this, then he did that. Instead, I stood in her kitchen and said the most useless sentence in the English language. I don't know. She pulled out a chair. Sit. So I sat. She put water in front of me and waited, because Tessa understood something most people don't. If a woman says I don't know after leaving a man's apartment in the middle of the evening, she usually knows exactly what happened. What she doesn't know yet is whether she's allowed to trust what it meant. I stared at the glass in my hands. He didn't do anything, I said finally. Tessa didn't blink. That's never a complete sentence. I looked up at her then, and for the first time since I'd left his building, I felt tears press hard behind my eyes. That's the problem, I said. He didn't do anything I can point to. Not the way people mean when they ask what happened. She sat across from me. Then tell it to me your way. So I did. But to explain that night, I have to back up to the part where I thought I was healing. 6 weeks earlier, I was in Dr. Patel's office, legs crossed, coffee untouched, listening to her say something I had spent 3 years paying her to prove untrue. You don't confuse anxiety with love, she said. You confuse intensity with meaning. I gave her a dry smile. That feels rude. It's accurate. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the framed watercolor behind her head, because eye contact during therapy should qualify as some kind of endurance sport. I don't only date unavailable men, I said. You date men who keep you working. I laughed once. That's a brutal phrase. She didn't smile. It's also the pattern. You are very comfortable earning what should be freely given. It would be easier to say she was wrong. Easier to say I had simply met a run of bad luck wearing expensive sneakers and vague communication skills. But the truth was uglier and more ordinary than that. There was Matt, who loved me best when I was halfway out the door. The further away I got, the more poetic he became. When I stayed, he turned back into a man who needed 72 hours to answer a basic question. There was Noah, who called me the easiest woman he'd ever talked to right before spending 5 months making me explain why plans required actual dates and times. There was Eric, whose specialty was making honesty sound like a favor. He could say something selfish, careless, or cruel and then wait for praise because at least he was being direct. Every one of those men left me with the same stupid ache. Not just heartbreak. Exhaustion. The kind that comes from trying to solve a person instead of being loved by one. Dr. Patel folded her hands in her lap. When something is steady, she said, you don't always experience it as safe. Sometimes you experience it as flat, because your body is used to chasing regulation through uncertainty. I pressed my lips together. I hear the words, I said. I hate them. That's normal. So what am I supposed to do? Date men who seem boring and hope my nervous system eventually catches up? I'm not asking you to force chemistry, she said. I'm asking you not to reject consistency on sight just because it doesn't wound you first. That sentence followed me home. It followed me into my kitchen when I repeated the session to Tessa while she stood over the stove making pasta and acting like she hadn't been trying to tell me the same thing for years. So, she said, stirring sauce like a woman personally offended by my romantic history, your therapist and I remain undefeated. You love this for you. I do, she said. The next decent man you meet, you are not allowed to disqualify him because he texts back and does not openly require rehabilitation. I like complicated men. You like men who create emotional escape rooms. That's unfair. That's gorgeous, she said. I'm keeping that phrase. 3 days later, I matched with Ethan. If you built a man in a lab designed to pass every give the nice guy a chance test, you would get Ethan Mercer. Not in a cartoon way. That's what made him dangerous. If he had been overeager or corny or transparently self-congratulatory from the beginning, I would have clocked it. But Ethan understood balance. He understood what looked reassuring versus what looked rehearsed, and he kept himself just on the safe side of that line. His profile had no mirror selfies, no shirtless beach photos, no group shots where you had to play detective. There was one picture of him in a navy sweater at what looked like his sister's wedding, one hiking with an old golden retriever whose gray muzzle made him seem instantly more trustworthy, one kneeling beside a raised garden bed in a community volunteer shirt, and one candid photo where he was laughing at something off camera like he had no idea anyone was taking it. His bio said he liked dependable people, long walks, real communication, and making the people in his life feel appreciated. That should have sounded a little polished. At the time it sounded like relief. We started messaging on a Tuesday. He wrote like an adult. Full sentences, actual punctuation, no lazy WID at 11:30 at night, no pretend aloofness. He asked about my work and then remembered the answer. He didn't steer the conversation sexual. He didn't vanish for a day and reappear with a vague excuse about being slammed. By Wednesday night he had asked thoughtful questions about my family and made me laugh twice hard enough that I reread the thread. By Thursday he had remembered that I hated raw tomatoes and that I still bought paper books because screens made reading feel like work. On Friday he said, I'd love to take you out this weekend if you're free. No game. No fake chill. No weird delay designed to make interest look accidental. I screenshotted the message and sent it to Tessa. She replied in 10 seconds. He used I'd love to marry him immediately. Our first date was coffee downtown on Saturday. He got there early. Not theatrically early. Not I've been waiting here forever early. Just early enough to hold us a table by the window and stand when he saw me walk in. That sounds small. It wasn't. The bar is in hell, yes, but there is something disarming about being greeted by a man who looks genuinely pleased to see you instead of mildly surprised that you materialized at all. He remembered what I looked like from my profile without needing an awkward verification text. He smiled, said my name, and immediately made room for me in the conversation like he already understood that some men mistake interrogation for interest. We talked for almost 2 hours. His sister lived in Portland. Mine lived in Chicago. He worked in commercial development. I worked in brand strategy. He'd adopted Murray, the old golden retriever in his photos, after an elderly neighbor died and the family couldn't take him. He liked cooking, but not in a showy way. He asked good questions. He listened to the answers. When I made a joke, he didn't bulldoze over it to tell a bigger one. He paid without making a speech about old-fashioned values. He held the door without turning it into theater. He walked me to my car and stopped far enough back that the gesture felt respectful instead of proprietary. At the end he said, "I had a really good time. I'd like to see you again." And the most confusing part was that I believed him. He had. He genuinely seemed to like me. And I felt nothing. Not dread. Not dislike. Not revulsion. Just almost nothing. No flutter. No replaying his smile in the car. No urge to tell Tessa every detail. No electric curiosity. He was handsome, thoughtful, stable, and my body responded to him like he was a very competent customer service representative. When I got home, Tessa called before I could text. Well, he was nice. That's a suspiciously flat delivery. He was genuinely nice, I said. Like objectively, annoyingly, legally nice. So what's wrong? I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror while I took out my earrings. That's the problem, I said. Nothing. She was quiet. Then she asked, "Did you feel bored?" I opened my mouth and stopped. That was the trap, right there. Trying to decide whether the absence of chaos was peace or whether the absence of chemistry was a real signal I should not keep explaining away. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe I'm just too used to men who make me anxious. Maybe, she said. Or maybe one date isn't enough. Go on one more. Dr. Patel said almost the same thing on Monday. Don't force connection, she told me. But don't dismiss steadiness just because it doesn't trigger adrenaline. What if I can't tell the difference yet? You learn by paying attention, she said. Not by overriding yourself. I nodded like I understood. I didn't. Ethan texted that night. He said he'd had a great time and asked if I'd be free Thursday for dinner. Again, no games. Again, no ambiguity. Again, a man behaving the way women claim to want, and the part of me that should have felt relieved mostly felt cornered by my own principles. So I said yes. Between date 1 and date 2, Ethan did something I described then as attentive. Now I'd call it calibrated. He texted enough to establish presence without looking needy. He asked how my Tuesday presentation went. He remembered I had one because I'd mentioned it once in passing. He sent a picture of Murray asleep upside down on the couch and said, "Thought you'd appreciate this level of commitment to rest." Individually, the messages were sweet. Collectively, they created a rhythm I noticed myself adjusting to. I answered a little faster than I normally would have, because he never made me wait long and I didn't want to be rude. When I got caught in back-to-back meetings for half the afternoon and didn't reply, he followed up with, "Hope your day didn't get away from you." Not accusing. Not even passive-aggressive. Just enough to let me know he had noticed the gap. That was the first thing about Ethan that deserves honesty. Men like him do not start with control. They start with observation. And if you are used to being neglected, observation can feel like care for longer than it should. Thursday dinner was at a small Italian restaurant with low lighting, good bread, and expensive candles pretending not to be expensive. When I got there, Ethan stood and held up a single wrapped flower from the florist next door. Not roses. A white tulip. On date 1, I had mentioned that tulips always made me think of my mother because she planted them every spring whether the weather cooperated or not. He remembered. That should have been lovely. It was. That's what made this so hard to explain later. The things he did were not fake in the sense of being invented. They were real actions. They simply served a second purpose I didn't fully understand yet. I smiled and took the flower. That's very sweet. His face changed in a small way I almost missed. Not softened. Satisfied. Thought of you, he said. Inside, the waiter seated us, and before I could open the menu all the way, Ethan had already ordered sparkling water for the table. I laughed lightly. You remembered. Of course. The waiter came back for our entrees, and Ethan said, "The cacio e pepe here is great. You'll probably like that." I looked up. I was actually thinking about the salmon. He smiled. Healthy choice. There it was. Tiny. Harmless, if you wanted to be generous. But something in me tightened. He hadn't exactly told me what to order. He had just presumed he knew what I would want, then framed my actual choice like a variation from expectation. A small thing. A very small thing. But small things are often where control tests the water. Dinner itself was easy enough. He was funny in a measured way. Smart. Observant. He told me about his sisters and how growing up around women had made him better at communication than most men. That line should have annoyed me. Instead, I laughed. Then he said, "A lot of people say they want a healthy relationship, but what they really want is emotional fireworks." It was close enough to what Dr. Patel had said that I almost relaxed. Maybe some people want chemistry, I said. Chemistry gets romanticized, he said. Half the time it's just instability in good lighting. Again, not wrong enough. That was the problem with Ethan. He kept using truths as skeleton keys. Near the end of dinner, he put his hand lightly on the small of my back as we walked out of the restaurant. I stiffened. It happened before I could hide it. His hand vanished instantly. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said too fast. I just don't love being guided. He smiled, stepped back, and said, "Good to know." That should have been reassuring. Instead, I spent the drive home wondering why a man who kept doing everything right left me feeling like I was slowly being organized. Tessa was on my couch when I got back, halfway through my leftover takeout and deeply invested in a dating show she always claimed to hate. She muted it when she saw my face. That expression means the plot thickens. I dropped into the chair opposite her. I think I'm losing my mind. Excellent. Continue. I told her about the tulip. The restaurant. The water. The menu comment. The hand on my back. The way he kept saying emotionally intelligent things in a tone that made them sound pre-approved. She listened with her head tilted slightly to one side. Then she said, "Okay." Okay, what? Okay, I get it. You get what? That he's doing all the right things and somehow making you feel like you're in a job interview. I stared at her. That is exactly it. She pointed a French fry at me. Good people don't usually feel like a role you have to perform correctly around them. I rubbed my forehead. Or maybe I'm suspicious of decency. Possible, she said. But answer one thing honestly. Okay. If he never brought flowers, remembered less, and texted a little worse, would you still want to go out with him? That answer arrived too fast. No, she nodded once. Then what you like is his effort. Not him. That irritated me because it felt too blunt and too true. I'm trying to do this differently, I said. I know, she said, and softened. Just don't turn that into a project where your only job is to be fair to a man. On Monday, Dr. Patel asked how day 2 had gone. I described the obvious things first. Thoughtful. Consistent. Easy to talk to. Then I described the harder parts. The assumptions. The subtle pressure. The strange sensation of being slightly managed. What do you feel in your body when you talk about him? She asked. Again with the body. Tight. Scared? No, trapped? I hesitated. Not exactly. Smaller? That landed. Yes, I said quietly. She nodded. Do not confuse the absence of chaos with the presence of safety. I looked away. Because if Ethan wasn't my healthy choice, then what exactly was I learning? Wasn't this the whole point? Wasn't I supposed to stop rejecting men simply because they didn't trigger the same old obsession cycle? I think I owe it to myself to stay open, I said. She studied me for a second. Be open, she said. Do not negotiate yourself down to prove you're growing. 2 days later, Ethan invited me to his apartment for dinner. Not in a late night, come over and hang kind of way. In a planned way. A careful way. He said he wanted to cook for me and that he had already picked up ingredients for lemon pasta because I'd mentioned on our first date that my grandmother used to make it whenever someone in the family had a bad week. He hadn't just remembered a detail. He had remembered its emotional setting. That should have felt intimate in a lovely way. Instead, it felt intimate in a fast way. I showed Tessa the text. She read it once and handed my phone back. You're going, she said. I think I should. Because you want to or because you've started treating this man like exposure therapy? I exhaled through my nose. Maybe both. She took the phone again, copied his address into our thread, then said, text me when you get there. If you need an emergency exit, call me and ask whether I fed your fake cat. I don't have a cat. Exactly. It's code. I laughed, but I let her do it. Partly because she was my best friend. Partly because the existence of an exit plan made me feel relieved in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. The night of dinner, I changed outfits 3 times. Not because I was excited. Because I wanted to look correct. Not sexy. Not casual. Not overly invested. Not cold. I wanted to arrive in whatever form would make the night easiest to understand later if it went well. That should have told me enough on its own. When I was leaving my apartment, Ethan texted, drive safe. Guest parking is on the side of the building. I'll come down and get you. Again, helpful. Again, 1 step ahead. His apartment building was one of those renovated warehouse buildings with polished concrete floors, a lobby full of oversized plants, and the kind of restrained expensive taste that makes every surface look intentional. He was already downstairs when I arrived. You made it, he said, smiling as if I had accomplished something charming. I have a navigation app and a deep fear of being late. He laughed and reached for the bottle of wine in my hand. You really didn't have to bring anything. I know. He leaned in like he was going to kiss my cheek, then stopped himself. That tiny pause should have read respectful. Instead, it felt like something else. Not consent exactly. Measurement. The elevator took us to the 6th floor. His apartment was beautiful in a way that almost worked against him because it looked too complete. Not staged for me specifically. Just maintained in a permanent state of presentability, like he was always half expecting to be judged and intended to win. The kitchen was immaculate. Wooden cutting board. Olive oil in a ceramic bottle. Lemons in a bowl. Soft jazz from a speaker. The couch had a dark green throw blanket folded with military precision over one arm. Even Murray's dog bed in the corner looked expensive. Wow, I said, because it was objectively impressive. He shrugged. I like things in order. There was nothing wrong with that sentence. And yet again, I felt that little inward contraction, like a door inside me quietly swung halfway shut. He took my coat and hung it in the closet. Offered me sparkling water before wine. Told me to make myself at home in a place that did not actually feel designed for people to relax in. For the first 20 minutes, nothing was overtly wrong. We cooked. We talked. He grated Parmesan while I chopped parsley. He moved around the kitchen efficiently, with the comfortable rhythm of someone who genuinely knew his own space. He made a joke about how Murray pretended to be elderly only when stairs were involved. I laughed. He looked good in a navy sweater with the sleeves pushed up. The apartment smelled like garlic and lemon and butter. Then I was cutting basil at the counter and he came up behind me, reached around, and closed his hand over my wrist to adjust the angle of the knife. "Like this," he said softly. "You'll have more control. Not painful. Not rough." But my whole body went rigid. He let go immediately. "Sorry," he said, smiling. "Kitchen instinct." "It's okay," I said. It was not okay. Because my discomfort had not come from the touch alone. It came from the assumption behind it. The ease. The uninvited correction wrapped in competence. I set the knife down and took a sip of wine, buying myself a second. He kept talking as if nothing had happened, and I kept answering as if my pulse hadn't kicked up for no obvious reason. A few minutes later, my phone lit up on the counter. "Tessa. Did you feed the fake cat?" I smiled without meaning to. Ethan glanced at the screen. "Protective friend?" he asked. "Very." He laughed lightly. "That's cute." The word landed wrong immediately. Cute. Like female caution was decorative. Like my friend checking in was endearing but unnecessary. Like he had already categorized outside concern as a harmless little obstacle to be charmed around. I typed back, "Not yet. Still shopping for imaginary kibble." Before I could put the phone down, Ethan said, "You know, you don't need to reassure people every 10 minutes. You're safe here." My thumb stopped. Again, if you strip context away, that sentence sounds kind. In the room, it felt different. Less reassurance. More instruction. You don't need outside contact. You don't need witnesses. You don't need to be anchored anywhere but here. I laughed because women are socialized to laugh at discomfort if the alternative might offend a man. "She's just nosy." "I'll try not to take it personally," he said, still smiling. There it was again. The tiny hook. Normal precautions translated into commentary on him. I set my phone face down and told myself to relax. Dinner was actually good. Very good. The pasta was bright and rich and comforting in the exact way my grandmother's never quite was, which should have made me like him more than I did. We sat at his table by the window while the city lights reflected in the glass behind him. For 10 minutes, the whole thing almost looked normal enough for me to be embarrassed by how alert I felt. Then he brought up his ex. Not dramatically. Not bitterly. Casually, like a man introducing supporting evidence. "She used to say I was intense," he said, twirling pasta onto his fork. I looked up. What did she mean by that? His mouth lifted a little. She meant I noticed everything. Something about the answer made my shoulders tighten. Like what? Like whether she followed through, he said. Whether she meant what she said. Whether her actions lined up with her words. He said it calmly. Rationally. Like he was discussing quality control. "That sounds kind of vague," I said carefully. He smiled. "It's only vague if accountability makes you uncomfortable." That landed too cleanly. For a second I just watched him. The exactness of his apartment. The exactness of his hair. The exactness of the way he said emotionally loaded words with no visible emotion. Then he added, "I think a lot of people want all the emotional rewards of commitment with none of the responsibility." Responsibility is a big word for a third date conversation. His eyes held mine. I take relationships seriously. There it was. Not romance. Wait. I set my fork down. I'm not saying seriousness is bad. He leaned back slightly. But I forced a small smile. But I think pace matters. It does, he said. And effort matters too. Another sentence that sounds harmless until it doesn't. Another sentence that can mean maturity in one man and debt in another. He watched me for a second too long. Then he said, "You get very careful when you disagree." My whole body sharpened. What? You do, he said. You start editing yourself. I let out a small laugh. That's a very specific read for date 3. I'm observant. He said it like a compliment I should appreciate. Then, I think you keep waiting for me to reveal some hidden flaw. I stared at him. That's not fair. Isn't it? The room got quieter. I think I'm still getting to know you, I said. He tilted his head. Or I'm not triggering the kind of chaos you normally confuse with connection. There it was. He had taken the most vulnerable truth I had ever offered in dating and turned it into a tool. I hadn't told him everything about my past, but I had told him enough. Enough about emotionally unavailable men. Enough about trying to choose differently. Enough about learning not to mistake unpredictability for chemistry. I had meant it as context. He heard leverage. My throat tightened. That's a pretty big assumption, I said. It's an obvious one. Or maybe I'm just moving at a normal pace. A flicker crossed his face. Gone in less than a second. Then he smiled again, but this one didn't reach his eyes. Claire, I'm not asking you for anything unreasonable. No sane woman on earth feels calmer after hearing that sentence. I pushed my chair back a little. I should probably head out. He glanced toward the clock on the oven. It was only 9:08. Already? I have an early morning. You mentioned that yesterday, he said. I assumed you meant later than this. I had never given him a time. Something cold moved through me. It's been a long week, I said. He set his fork down very carefully. I spent all day planning this. There it was. The receipt. All the thoughtfulness. All the care. All the little details. Suddenly they had edges. I stood. I had a nice time, I said. I'm just going to head home. He stayed seated for one beat too long, looking up at me. Then he stood too. That's interesting. I gripped the back of my chair. What is? That you can sit through all of this, let me make an effort, let me be intentional, and still act like leaving at 9 is some kind of necessary boundary. He said it calmly. That made it worse. Because if he had yelled, I would have had clarity. Instead, he sounded like a disappointed teacher discussing a student who had wasted a good opportunity. I didn't say any of that. You didn't have to. My heart was pounding now. Not wildly. Precisely. My whole system had narrowed down to one instruction. Leave. I picked up my bag. I'm going home. He took a step toward the hallway. Not enough to block me. Enough to claim space. I hate how important that distinction felt in the moment. I hate that a part of me still wanted to be fair. He's not blocking the door, I thought. He's just standing there. That is how women get trapped in arguments with themselves. He doesn't have to physically stop you if he can make you feel ridiculous for wanting to go. I just think it says a lot, he said quietly, that men who give you half of nothing probably get endless patience, and I make you dinner and suddenly you need an exit strategy. I had never mentioned an exit strategy. Not out loud. I stared at him. Then I realized what he meant. Not literally an exit plan. Emotionally. He could feel me withdrawing, and it enraged him. Move, I said. His eyebrows lifted. What? Move. For one unbearable second, he didn't. Then he stepped aside with both hands raised slightly, like he was the reasonable one and I was escalating. "Wow," he said. "Okay." I walked to the closet for my coat. He got there first. Not dramatically. He simply opened the closet door, took down my coat, and held it out to me like a host helping a rude guest leave early from a dinner party. "I'm not dangerous, Claire." That sentence made every hair on my arms rise. Because safe men do not need to announce that they are safe in the exact moment you are trying to get away from them. I took the coat from his hand. "I didn't say you were. You don't have to." His jaw tightened. "It's obvious." I shoved my arms into the sleeves. "That's not what this is." "No?" He gave a short laugh. "Then what is it?" "You say you want a man who shows up, who communicates, who puts in effort. And when one does, you treat him like a threat." There it was again. Effort as entitlement. Consistency as down payment. Thoughtfulness as moral leverage. My whole understanding of him snapped into focus at once. The flowers. The memory. The polished apartment. The careful listening. None of it had been meaningless. But none of it had been free either. He had not been building connection. He had been building a case. A case for access. A case for faster trust. A case for why any hesitation from me should count as ingratitude. "No one owes you access because you planned a nice evening," I said. His face changed. Not loud. Not explosive. Worse. It emptied out. Like I had just failed a test he assumed he had designed too well for failure. "That's not what I'm saying." "It is exactly what you're saying." He looked at me with open contempt now. "This is why you keep ending up with men who treat you badly," he said. "You don't trust stability. You punish effort." That line hit the oldest weak point in me. The exact oldest one. The one that whispered maybe I was too damaged to recognize a good thing. Maybe I kept sabotaging health because it didn't feel dramatic enough. Maybe this whole evening would look different to a more healed version of me. For one awful second, I nearly stopped. Nearly apologized. Nearly sat back down just to prove I wasn't the kind of woman he thought I was. That's how close self-betrayal can get when it borrows your own healing language. Then something even older and deeper cut through it. I did not want to be in that apartment. I did not need a thesis for that feeling. I opened the door. Behind me, his voice went flat and ugly. "I can see why your exes never took you seriously." I didn't look back. I stepped into the hallway, pressed the elevator button hard enough to hurt, and only exhaled when the doors closed between us. By the time I got to Tessa's apartment, I was shaking from the effort of holding myself together. She listened to everything without interrupting. The phone comment. The ex-girlfriend's story. The way he used my own self-awareness against me. The coat. The line about stability. The final insult. When I finished, she leaned back and said, very clearly, "That man is not nice. He is curated." I laughed once and then covered my face with both hands. "I still feel like maybe I'm exaggerating." No, her voice stayed calm. "You feel like you don't have enough evidence to justify your instinct." I looked at her. She held my gaze. "Your body is not a courtroom," she said. "You do not need cross-examination to leave a room you no longer want to be in." That line did something permanent to me. Because she was right. So much of being a woman is being taught that your refusal has to survive a review board. That your discomfort has to be translated into language men respect before you're allowed to act on it. That if the threat doesn't look like a threat from the outside, then maybe your fear is vanity, drama, projection, baggage, trauma, overreaction. I slept on Tessa's couch that night because my own apartment felt too quiet for the amount of adrenaline still moving through me. At 7:12 the next morning, Ethan texted. I'm sorry if things felt intense last night. I care about intentional dating and maybe I came on too strong. I stared at the screen. For half a second I thought, maybe that's enough. Maybe he reflected. Maybe I'm the one holding on to the worst interpretation. Then the second text came. It's frustrating to feel punished for doing everything right. There it was. Not apology. Accounting. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, I think you have a lot of walls up, and I was probably naive to think consistency would feel safe to someone with your history. I laughed out loud in Tessa's kitchen. Not because it was funny. Because it was so cleanly manipulative that all ambiguity vanished. He had taken the most vulnerable thing I told him and sharpened it into a blade. You have walls. You have history. You are confused. I am healthy. Your discomfort is damage. Classic. By noon there were 3 more messages. One said he hoped I eventually learned the difference between being triggered and being mistreated. One said adulthood required knowing how to receive effort without turning it into suspicion. One said he had been willing to accept my baggage, but not if I was determined to make him the villain in a story he didn't belong in. That last one made me smile in spite of myself. Accept my baggage. As if I had arrived at dinner with 3 suitcases and a legal disclaimer. I blocked his number. Then I spent 45 minutes at my desk replaying the entire thing from the beginning without the flattering narration I had been supplying on his behalf. The check-in texts that created a response rhythm before intimacy existed. The way he liked being thanked. The way he guessed what I'd want and made it sound thoughtful instead of presumptuous. The way my friend's caution became cute. The way he touched me in the kitchen to correct me without asking. The way his ex story framed control as standards. The way every boundary I set became commentary on his virtue. The way he didn't need me to feel safe. He needed me to agree that he was safe. That evening I had therapy. When I finished telling Dr. Patel what happened, she was silent for a moment. Then she asked, "What part are you still arguing with?" I looked down at my hands. "The part where I worry I'm doing exactly what I always do," I said. "Pulling away from someone decent because I don't know how to handle decent." She nodded once. "Did he become more respectful when you expressed discomfort?" "No." "Did he become more curious?" "No." "Did he make your boundary about his goodness?" I swallowed. "Yes." "Then the issue is not whether he looked healthy on paper," she said. "The issue is what happened when he discovered you were still separate from him." That sentence hit so hard I had to look away. Because that was it, wasn't it? You do not know how safe someone is when things are smooth and flattering and easy. You learn when they hear no. You learn when they do not receive immediate access. You learn when your boundaries interrupt the story they had already written. I wanted him to be the lesson, I said quietly. Dr. Patel's expression softened. I know. That was the most embarrassing truth of all. Ethan was not just a man I dated 3 times. He was a narrative I wanted to prove. The nice, steady, emotionally available man shows up. I stop mistaking chaos for chemistry. Everything clicks. Growth achieved. Gold star for nervous system repair. I wanted that so badly I nearly volunteered myself into a situation that felt wrong just to preserve the storyline. 2 days later, flowers arrived at my office. White tulips. The receptionist, Marisol, called me downstairs smiling like this was the fun kind of workplace gossip. Then she saw my face and stopped smiling. You want me to toss these? She asked immediately. Yes, I said. She slid them under the desk like they were evidence. There was an envelope tucked into the arrangement. I opened it in the elevator because some masochistic part of me wanted confirmation. One line. I'm sorry you misunderstood me. No signature. He didn't need one. My skin went cold. I had told him only the general area where I worked. Once. Casually. On date 1. He had found the office anyway. This is another thing people get wrong about fear. It doesn't require a crime. Sometimes it's just information arriving in the wrong place from the wrong person in the wrong context. A man you blocked should not be able to place flowers in your workplace lobby and call that misunderstanding. I texted Tessa a picture of the note. She called immediately. Nope. That was my reaction too. No, I mean absolutely not. I'm coming over tonight and we're reporting him. That evening we filed a report through the dating app support system. I kept the wording cold and factual. We met 3 times. I ended contact after he reacted poorly to my leaving his apartment. I blocked him. He then contacted my workplace. I am documenting behavior that escalated after a clear boundary. I expected to feel dramatic writing it. Instead, I felt calm. Because facts stop wobbling when you stop minimizing them. 2 days later, Tessa sent me a screenshot from a local women's group I wasn't in. Recognize him? I opened it and felt my stomach drop. There was Ethan's face. Same smile. Same dog photo. The post was from a woman named Lila. Went out with him twice. Seemed super gentlemanly. Got weird when I didn't want to go back to his place. Has anyone else dated him? There were comments already. One woman said he'd sent her a paragraph about emotional maturity after she declined a 3rd date. Another said he had shown up outside her building with pastries after she told him she wasn't interested in continuing. Another said he was great until he realized attention wasn't automatically turning into access. Then I saw the comment that finally put language to the whole thing. He's very invested in being a good guy. It gets hostile the moment you don't cooperate with the script. I sat down on my bed and reread that sentence 5 times. Cooperate with the script. Yes. That was exactly what I had been feeling without being able to fully name it. Ethan was not a nice man who occasionally got misunderstood. He was a man who had studied the external behavior of niceness and turned it into a structure. A path. A sequence. Observe. Remember. Perform. Accelerate intimacy. Earn credit. Request trust. Take hesitation personally. Punish resistance. Call it honesty. It was so much bigger than one awkward night in a polished apartment. What he wanted was not closeness. He wanted compliance that could still be described as romance. I didn't comment in the group. I didn't need validation anymore. But I screenshotted every single response and saved them in a folder on my phone anyway, because women learn early that even certainty sometimes likes backup. A week later, Ethan emailed me from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was closure. I almost deleted it unread. Then I thought of the flowers in my office and opened it. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first said he regretted that I had interpreted male seriousness as threat. The second said he hoped I eventually healed enough to recognize the difference between standards and control. The third said he would not contact me again because he respected himself too much to keep pouring energy into someone determined to misunderstand him. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was perfect. Every single line still revolved around the same thing: his self-image. His standards. His seriousness. His wounded dignity. Even his final goodbye was still a performance of reasonableness designed to leave him morally intact. I didn't answer. I blocked that email too. Then I opened a note on my phone and typed out everything I had learned the hard way. A nice gesture stops being nice the second it becomes leverage. A boundary is still a boundary even when the other person dislikes it. Thoughtfulness is not proof of safety. Being understood is not the same as being respected. Someone who is truly safe does not need you to stop checking in with your friends so they can feel trusted. The most important sentence I wrote was the simplest one. He didn't want me to feel safe. He wanted me to certify that he was safe. That changed something for me. Not all at once. Not in some glowing cinematic montage where I emerged transformed and never doubted myself again. Healing is slower and much less photogenic than that. But after Ethan, I stopped arguing so aggressively against my own shrinking. I stopped treating every internal warning like a legal claim that required supporting documents. I stopped assuming that if a man looked good on paper, that any discomfort must be my unresolved trauma trying to sabotage me. A month later, I went on a date with a man named Jonah. This is not a love story twist. He was not secretly my soulmate in dark denim. He was just a man I met at a friend's birthday dinner who had kind eyes, a laugh that came out too loud in restaurants, and an actual job as a civil engineer. He texted like a normal person. Which is to say, not especially well. Sometimes he took a few hours to answer. Sometimes he sent short messages. Once he forgot to reply at all and followed up the next morning with, "I'm sorry, I fell asleep with my laptop open on my chest like a divorced dad in a commercial." When he needed to reschedule our first date because work ran late, he said, "No pressure if that's annoying. Saturday works too if you'd rather." No guilt. No tiny punishment. No implication that my flexibility would reveal moral character. At dinner, he asked whether I minded if he sat on the same side of the booth because the other side was under an air vent and freezing. Asked. Halfway through the night he moved my glass away from the edge of the table, then stopped and said, "Sorry, is that okay?" Asked. When he walked me to my car, he didn't touch the small of my back. He didn't guide me through a doorway. He didn't reach for me like access had already been implied. At the car, he looked at me and said, "I want to kiss you, but I also don't want to assume." That was when I finally understood what had been wrong with Ethan. Because in that moment, with Jonah standing under a flickering parking lot light, I did not feel bored. I did not feel flat. I did not feel managed, measured, or slowly maneuvered toward a role. I just felt present. Interested. Roomy. That is the word I wish I had known earlier. Roomy. Real safety has room in it. Room for a slower pace. Room for uncertainty. Room for your own timing. Room for your own friends. Room for a changed mind. Room for a no that does not become an insult. Room for your body to remain your own. For a long time, I had two broken interpretations of dating. The first was the one my bad relationships taught me: if it feels intense, it must matter. The second was the one Ethan almost taught me: if a man performs health convincingly enough, then any discomfort you feel must be self-sabotage. Both were wrong. What I know now is simpler, quieter, and infinitely more useful. A good man does not become colder when your boundaries stay intact. A good man does not turn effort into debt. A good man does not hear caution and translate it into disrespect. A good man does not need applause for behaving like a decent human being. And a truly safe man never makes you feel like refusing him is an accusation he intends to punish. The story people tell women like me is always embarrassingly simple. You ignored the nice guy. You chased chaos. You got hurt. You learned your lesson too late. I hate that story. Not because it never happens. Because it gives entirely too much credit to men who think decency is a coupon code. Sometimes the man being overlooked is genuinely kind and simply not your person. And sometimes the man calling himself a nice guy is not kind at all. He is strategic, observant, self-controlled, and deeply invested in a version of goodness that should produce results. The difference matters. Because one of those men can hear no and remain himself. The other only looks kind for as long as yes seems likely. I still think about that night outside Tessa's apartment. My shoes in one hand. My pulse in my throat. The humiliating uncertainty of not being able to point to one dramatic event and say there, that was it. I used to think certainty had to come first. Now I know better. Sometimes the first proof is your own relief once the door closes behind you. And sometimes the safest decision you make all year is the one that sounds hardest to defend out loud. I did give the nice guy a chance. That's how I learned he was never nice at all.